I was juggling 3 bags of groceries when she appeared at the corner of the parking lot, her heels clicking softly against the concrete, eyes scanning the row of cars like she was searching for something she'd lost years ago. I froze for a fraction of a second, not because I recognized her, though I did vaguely, from the cafe downtown, but because there was something about the way she carried herself, deliberate but unhurried, that made the air around her feel heavier, warmer, somehow insistent. "Here," she said, before I could even adjust my grip, stepping closer. Her voice was calm, precise, like she had measured every word before letting it out. "Let me help." I nearly dropped the bags. She was older, mid-40s at least, though she wore it with ease, like her age had nothing to do with her. Her blazer was cut perfectly, sleeves rolled to the elbow, exposing a silver bracelet that caught the sunlight in flashes. The corners of her eyes crinkled ever so slightly when she smiled, not a full smile, just a hint, as if she didn't trust happiness to last long. I mumbled something, "Thank you, I think," and she lifted a bag from my hands effortlessly, adjusting her posture as if she did this kind of thing every day. And maybe she did. I noticed her nails, short but polished, and the faint scent of something earthy, cinnamon or sandalwood, trailing behind her. She carried the groceries like she carried herself, quietly competent, aware of everyone else, yet completely unbothered. We started walking toward my car, side by side, and for some reason the air between us thickened. Not with tension, exactly, but with an invisible pull, like we were 2 magnets who hadn't yet realized how strong the attraction was. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice the small details, the way her fingers curved around the bag handle, the slight tilt of her head when she looked at me, the brief, almost imperceptible pause before she spoke. "Do you ever?" she asked suddenly. The words hung there, fragile, unfinished, like they were afraid of falling too fast. I blinked. My mind raced through a dozen possibilities. Do I ever what? Cook? Work overtime? Daydream about strangers in parking lots? None of them felt right. I stammered, and she raised an eyebrow, amused, not mockingly, just curious, patient in a way that made my throat tighten. We reached the car, and she set the bag down. Our hands brushed, a brief, accidental touch that left warmth crawling up my arm. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware that my shirt had a wrinkle I hadn't noticed, that my hair was probably too messy, that my heartbeat had decided to sprint without permission. She glanced at the bag she'd just set down, then back at me, her eyes catching mine in a look that lasted longer than it should have. There was something in that glance, something unspoken, layered the confidence, maybe, but also a quiet challenge, a question without a question. I wanted to answer her, to fill the silence with words that mattered, but all I could manage was a tight-lipped smile. She tilted her head slightly, as if encouraging me, teasing me to speak, but I didn't. Not yet. And as I climbed into the driver's seat later, still fumbling with the door handle, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about that glance. The way it lingered, unclaimed, like it was daring me to chase it, or maybe, to be honest, daring me to see it clearly. I didn't know her name, I didn't know why she'd asked that question, or if she even expected an answer, but I knew I was going to see her again. And the thought alone made my chest tighten in a way I didn't want to understand. I didn't expect to see her again that afternoon, but there she was, crouched over the dusty shelves in the small bookstore where I'd gone to kill time. She had that same effortless composure, but now there was a faint crease in her brow, a shadow under her eyes that spoke of late nights or worries she didn't share. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice came out a little too eager. She glanced up, startled, then quickly masked it with a polite nod. "I didn't expect anyone here," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her voice had that same calm precision, but something in it wavered, like she wasn't sure if she wanted to talk, or maybe, if she could. I drifted closer, careful not to crowd her space, watching the subtle movements. The way her hands hovered over the books, her fingers brushing spines as if she were measuring their weight not just physically but emotionally. I noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she exhaled through her nose just before she laughed quietly at something she read. The laugh was brief, like she didn't quite trust it, but it was enough to make me pause. "Need a hand with those?" I asked, nodding toward a stack that looked like it might topple over. She hesitated just for a second, then nodded. "Thanks," she said softly, letting me lift the heavier volumes. Her fingers brushed mine as I handed her a paperback, and I caught a glimpse of something fragile in that moment, like a crack in the armor she wore so well. We worked in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by the soft rustle of pages and the distant hum of the air conditioner. I watched her, taking in details I didn't know I could notice, the way she adjusted her watch with meticulous care, the faint lines around her mouth that softened when she smiled at a particularly clever title, the small sigh she let out when she finally straightened a leaning pile. There was a pause as she stepped back, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like she was reassessing whether this was safe territory. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck somewhere behind my teeth. She didn't ask me to speak. She didn't have to. Her silence was a challenge, an invitation, a question I didn't know how to answer. Finally, she looked at me, not fully, just a sidelong glance, and the moment stretched. The kind of moment that leaves the air charged, makes your skin feel too aware of itself. She leaned slightly against the counter, shoulders relaxing just enough that I could see the tension she'd been carrying. "Thanks," she said again, quieter this time, almost like she was confessing it to herself rather than me. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, that helping her felt easy, natural, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded, holding her gaze for a beat too long before looking away, feeling that faint pull in my chest I didn't know how to name. And as she returned to the shelves, adjusting a book with deliberate care, I realized that the smallest gestures, the brush of her hand, the tilt of her head, the fleeting vulnerability behind her eyes, were already impossible to forget. The rain came down hard that evening, turning the streets into silver rivers reflecting the harsh yellow of streetlights. I was parked outside her apartment building, holding a package she hadn't realized she'd forgotten in my car. The air smelled of wet asphalt and something faintly metallic, like the storm was sharpening every sensation. She opened the door before I could knock, hair damp at the nape of her neck, a loose scarf tangled around her shoulders. Her eyes flicked to the package, then back to me, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that small exchange. "Thanks," she said softly, her fingers brushing mine as she took it. The touch was brief, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I wanted to say something daring, reckless, revealing, but I didn't. We lingered in the doorway, neither stepping back, neither speaking, the silence thick around us. Her jacket smelled faintly of rain and the perfume she always wore, earthy and warm, and I noticed the small tremor in her hands as she adjusted it. I wanted to reach for them, steady her, but I didn't. Not yet. "I wasn't expecting the storm," she admitted finally, voice low, hesitant. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "I should probably," a sudden ring cut through the tension, her phone vibrating sharply against the counter inside. She glanced at it, face tightening for a second before she checked the screen. I glimpsed the name and instantly understood, someone from her past, someone complicated. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. "I should take this," she murmured, voice polite but distant, like the call was a reminder of all the boundaries she insisted on maintaining. She stepped back slightly, breaking the proximity that had been hovering between us. I stayed quiet, letting her move, letting the moment slip. Inside, though, everything was twisting, desire, worry, the faint ache of knowing that some invisible line had almost been crossed. The storm outside pounded against the building, a perfect counterpoint to the quiet chaos inside me. She returned the phone to her bag without answering, the tremor in her fingers now gone, replaced by a deliberate steadiness. I noticed it all, the subtle clench of her jaw, the faint flush on her cheeks, the way her eyes flicked to mine as if checking for a reaction. I offered nothing, only a nod, small, careful. She smiled, faint, almost apologetic, and it cut through me sharper than any words could. For a moment, I imagined what would happen if I stepped closer, if I let the storm outside mirror the storm inside me. I could see her leaning slightly, the tilt of her head, the softness in her eyes, but reality anchored me. The phone, the storm, her own restraint, it all reminded me that this was impossible, or at least not yet. And yet, in that suspended beat between intention and action, everything felt raw, electric, unclaimed. The package sat heavy in her hands, the rain continued its relentless rhythm, and neither of us moved. We were sitting in her kitchen, the late afternoon light slanting across the countertop, turning the dust motes in the air golden. Outside, the city murmured through the cracked open window, distant horns, a dog barking, the faint scrape of shoes against pavement, but inside, it felt like the world had shrunk to the space between us. I had been trying to make small talk, fumbling with the coffee cups, noticing how her hands lingered on the rim, how her fingers drummed lightly against the table as if the rhythm could steady her. She didn't look at me, not fully, and I realized that the quiet between us wasn't empty, it was weighted, vibrating with everything neither of us dared say. Finally, she broke it. Her voice was low, tentative, almost afraid it might shatter if she pushed too hard. What are we doing? I froze. Not because I didn't know, but because the truth was bigger, messier, harder to name than any answer I could give. My chest tightened, my hands wrapped instinctively around the mug as if holding on to it might make me steady enough to speak. I don't know, I said finally, voice uneven, too loud in the quiet. I thought I knew, but, she let out a soft, almost inaudible sigh, leaning back slightly, arms crossed, shoulders tight. It doesn't feel normal, she admitted. The words weren't accusing, they were fragile, like she was admitting something she didn't fully understand herself. Her eyes finally met mine, long and unwavering, and I saw everything there, the exhaustion, the restraint, the faint flicker of something she'd been trying to hide. I wanted to reach for her hand, to offer some small anchor, but I didn't. Not yet. We sat in silence again, the kind that hums against your ribs and makes you aware of every small sound, the drip of the faucet, the distant rumble of traffic, the uneven rhythm of our breathing. I watched her, memorizing the lines at the corner of her eyes, the subtle dip of her lips, the way she kept tucking her hair behind her ears as if the motion could organize the chaos she felt. What happens if we, whatever this is, goes too far, she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze dropped to the cup in her hands, but I could feel her watching me all the same, even in her avoidance. I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. The truth was a tangle of desire, confusion, guilt, and something I didn't want to name aloud. Instead, I simply moved my mug slightly closer to her, letting our fingers brush just barely, a tentative, almost accidental contact that left heat crawling up my arm. She looked at our hands, then away, lips pressed together. I wanted to say everything and nothing at the same time, to confess the chaos she'd stirred in me without giving her a single concrete word. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the room, and she finally exhaled, a small, trembling sound that made the quiet unbearable. She had me help her carry a small stack of boxes from her car into the apartment, the kind you never think twice about, until one of them slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a muted thud. She bent down to pick it up, dusting it off, and I noticed a worn envelope tucked inside the stack, edges frayed, handwriting elegant and careful. That shouldn't be here, she said quietly, hesitating, as if the words themselves might break something inside her. I froze, unsure whether to ask or just stay still, letting her choose. She finally exhaled, slow, deliberate, and sat on the edge of her sofa, envelope in hand. It's from him, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't throw it away. I guess I wasn't ready. I didn't know what to say. Him. The past. The heartbreak she carried like a shadow. I only watched her, noticing the small tremble in her hands, the way her shoulders slumped a fraction, the faint ache in her eyes. He meant a lot to me, she continued, voice cracking softly, almost ashamed. I thought I'd moved on, but sometimes I wonder if I ever really did. I wanted to reach out, offer some impossible comfort, but the right words never came. Instead, I stayed there, quietly present, letting her unburden herself without trying to fix anything. It wasn't about me, not yet, but I could feel the pull, the way her vulnerability tugged at the corners of my own restraint. You remind me of him, she said suddenly, looking up at me, eyes wide, searching, not accusing, just curious, tentative. In little ways. The way you notice things. The way you don't push too hard. It's unsettling sometimes. Her words landed softly, like pebbles in a pond, and I realized my chest was tight. It wasn't jealousy, at least, not exactly, it was something more complicated, a quiet ache that settled into my ribs. I nodded, unsure how to answer. What could I say? That I wasn't him? That I wasn't trying to replace anyone? That somehow, being near her made the past feel simultaneously close and unbearably distant? She opened the envelope carefully, and I saw a photograph slip from inside. A younger version of her, smiling, holding someone whose face I didn't recognize at first. Then she tilted it just slightly, and I saw him, her past, her memory, the man who had left marks she hadn't yet erased. I looked away for a moment, feeling the weight of the space between us grow heavier, filled with unspoken histories and fragile trust. When I looked back, she was staring at the photo, lips pressed together, her hand shaking slightly. I didn't realize how much I kept holding on, she admitted softly. Her eyes met mine then, not demanding, not pleading, just raw. Honest. Open. I felt a shiver run through me. Not fear, not desire exactly, but the kind of tremor that changes the way you see someone entirely, their strength, their fragility, their humanity. We were in her living room that evening, the low hum of the heater blending with the quiet city outside. The storm from a few nights ago had left the windows streaked with faint lines of rain, and the apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. We didn't speak at first, just moved around the space, arranging books, shifting boxes, adjusting cushions, until the silence became its own conversation. I caught her glancing at me a few times, small, fleeting looks that didn't demand a response but seemed to check if I was still there, still present. I realized I didn't want to move. I didn't want to break whatever fragile balance had finally settled between us. You know, she said softly, finally breaking the quiet, I've spent a long time thinking I had to handle everything on my own. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, fingers twisting a threadbare cuff of her sweater. I didn't realize that someone else could actually just be there. Without trying to fix me. Without expecting anything in return. I swallowed, heart tight, because I knew exactly what she meant. I shifted closer, careful, deliberate, giving her the space to breathe, but close enough that she could feel it. I didn't expect this either, I admitted quietly. But I'm here. I want to be. Just like this. Her shoulders relaxed fractionally, and she let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh, the kind that carries 1,000 unspoken words. She tilted her head toward me, and without thinking, I reached out, letting my fingers brush hers. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into the touch, a small acknowledgement that the distance between us had narrowed in a way neither of us could deny. We moved like that for a few moments, either saying more than necessary, neither forcing anything, but everything shifted in the space between us. The past heartbreaks, the hesitation, the unspoken questions, they didn't vanish, but they softened, dissolved into something patient, something earned. Her eyes found mine again, long and steady, and for the first time I felt the quiet inevitability of it, that we were here together, not by chance, but because we'd navigated every awkward pause, every stolen glance, every fragile confession to arrive at this. I noticed the small details, the warmth of her hand, the faint scent of her perfume, the tiny crease by her eye when she smiled, just a hint. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just two people sharing space, sharing breath, and recognizing in that simplicity that they mattered to each other. We sat down on the couch, side by side, letting the quiet fold around us like a soft blanket. No words were needed. No declarations. The acknowledgement of what had grown between us, fragile and real, was enough. Her fingers brushed mine again, this time lingering just slightly longer, and I felt a subtle tremor of understanding pass through us, mutual, patient, gentle. I remember the first time I realized things had shifted between us, not with fireworks or dramatic confessions, but in the quiet after the storm, sitting on her couch with the city murmuring outside. I could feel it then, the slow unfolding of something neither of us had planned but both had earned. Looking back now, I see how much we changed. She learned, finally, that letting someone in didn't mean losing herself. And I learned that patience, watching, listening, noticing, could be its own kind of courage. We didn't declare love in the way movies do, but we didn't need to. Every glance, every brief touch, every silence shared carried its own honesty. I still notice the little things, the tilt of her head when she's deep in thought, the way she laughs quietly at something only she finds funny, the warmth of her hand resting against mine in those rare, perfect moments of calm. She notices me too, in ways she doesn't always speak aloud, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a soft smile that lingers longer than it should. We are still imperfect, still cautious. Some days, the past whispers, the old regrets surface, but we face them differently now. Together, not as shadows stalking each other, but as people who've learned the slow rhythm of care, understanding, and quiet devotion. There's something grounding about that. Love doesn't have to be explosive to matter. Sometimes it's the small, earned gestures, the hand on the arm, the shared glance across a room, the unspoken acknowledgement that you've chosen to stay, that tell you more than words ever could. I think back to the first time I helped her carry groceries, that awkward, electric moment, and I can still feel the pull that started it all. What followed wasn't perfect, wasn't easy, but it was real. Every pause, every glance, every question we couldn't answer immediately led us here, to this quiet understanding. And now, as I sit here remembering, I realize that slow burn, messy, human love has its own kind of beauty. It leaves marks you carry, lessons you remember, and a warmth that stays long after the moment itself passes.